You're listening to Just a Dude podcast with your host, Nathan. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Let's roll. Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to Just a Dude in the News, where myself, your host, just a regular dude, breaks down the biggest stories of the week with a little bit of common sense and a whole lot of real talk. It's Friday, June 20th, 2025, and we're diving into the top 10 news stories in the United States from the past week. That includes June 13th through the 20th. Man, it's been a wild ride out there. Parades, protests, and some big court rulings. So grab a cold one, kick back, and let's get into it. All right. Let's start off with a big one. On June 14th, President Trump threw a massive military parade in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the Army's 250th birthday, which just so happened to land on his 79th birthday. Talk about a flex. Thousands of Americans showed up in MAGA hats and red, white, and blue gear, waving flags and cheering as tanks and troops rolled down the streets. The vibe was pure patriotism, with folks celebrating the strength of our military and Trump's leadership. He gave a speech about General Mad Anthony Wayne storming the British back in the Revolution, tying it to America's never-back-down spirit. Gotta say, it was a bold move to remind everyone what makes this country strong. Now, not everyone was waving Old Glory. Protests popped off in D.C. and other cities, with some folks calling it a show of ego rather than unity. The No Kings crowd was out in force, especially in Los Angeles, where things got heated with police in riot gear and a curfew kicking in at 8 p.m. Look, I get it. Free speech is the bedrock of this country, and people have the right to protest. But when you're burning flags or clashing with cops, it's hard to see that as anything but performative chaos. The parade wasn't about one man. It was about honoring the men and women who have kept this nation free for over 250 years. The media, of course, had a field day. Outlets like the New York Times tried to spin it as divisive, pointing to an assassination in Minnesota and Middle East tensions as overshadowing the event. But let's be real. Most Americans watching those Bradleys roll by were proud, not pissed. Social media was lit with videos of the parade, and the hashtag Army250 was trending hard on X. The left-leaning press wants to frame this as Trump flexing too hard, but I say it's about time we celebrated our military without apology. Still, the protests highlight a divide we can't ignore. While D.C. was a sea of patriotism, places like Portland and L.A. saw marchers with signs saying, "We fought a king in 1775, we'll fight one in 2025. Hyperbole much? The right sees this as a stand for strength. The left sees it as authoritarianism. Both sides are dug in, but I'm betting most folks just want a country that's secure and free. Let's keep an eye on how this plays out. Speaking of those protests, let's dive into the No Kings movement that exploded across the U.S. this week. Starting June 14th, crowds hit the streets in cities like Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Portland, and even here in Akron, Ohio, pushing back against Trump's policies. From travel bans to deportation plans, the left's calling it a power grab, with signs quoting, "We fought a dictator in 1945, we'll fight whatever this is in 2025. Ouch. Dramatic much? The marches were mostly peaceful, but LA saw some clashes with tear gas and curfew making headlines. Here's my take. Protest all you want. That's really your right. But when you're shutting down streets or breaking windows, you're not winning hearts and minds. You're just making life harder for regular everyday folks. The No Kings label is aimed at Trump, painting him as some wannabe monarch. Come on now. The guy's pushing policies to secure the border and put America first. Hardly the stuff of crowns and thrones. Social media posts showed a mix of support and shade, with some calling the protest a necessary stand and others saying it's just sore losers rehashing 2020 vibes. The Washington Post and ABC News covered the marches like they were the second coming of the revolution. But let's pump the brakes. These protests aren't about policy details, they're about feelings. Trump's base, on the other hand, sees this as noise from folks who don't like losing elections. Data from a Washington Post poll shows 45% of Americans oppose his hardline policies, but 25% support them and 30% are just unsure. Sounds like most people are still figuring out what's what. What's next? The protests aren't slowing down, especially with Trump's travel ban expansion making waves. The right's calling for law and order, while the left's doubling down on resistance. As a dude who values freedom, I say let's debate ideas, not burn stuff down. Keep it civil, and maybe we can actually talk about what's best for the country. All right, let's talk borders. On June 14th, the Washington Post dropped a bombshell. The Trump administration's considering adding 36 countries to the travel ban list. This is a big jump from the 12 countries like Iran, Libya, and Yemen already restricted on June 4th. The plan gives these nations 60 days to meet security requirements or face entry bans. This is classic Trump. Prioritize American safety with no apologies. The logic's simple. Keep out potential threats, especially with tensions in the Middle East heating up. Back in 2018, the Supreme Court upheld a version of Trump's travel ban, so there's precedent here. Supporters on social media are cheering, saying it's about protecting our homeland from chaos spilling over from places like Iran or Somalia. National security is no joke, and after decades of porous borders, a lot of folks are ready for a hard line. But the other side's crying foul, calling it xenophobic and a repeat of the 2017 airport chaos. Critics say it's too broad, targeting entire nations instead of individuals. The left-leaning media is framing it as a betrayal of American values, but let's be real. Every country has the right to decide who comes in. The internal memo leaked to the Post shows the administration's serious about enforcement, and that's got the open borders crowd in a tizzy. This one's a powder keg. If the ban expands, expect more protests and legal battles. But for a lot of Americans, especially those waving MAGA hats, this is about putting the U.S. first. The debate's not going away, and neither is the divide. My take, secure the border, vet who's coming in, and let's focus on keeping America safe. Now, let's go global. This story cannot be ignored. The Israel-Iran conflict blew up this week, and the U.S. is right in the middle of it. Since June 13th, Israel's been bombing Iranian nuclear sites, while Iran fired missiles at an Israeli hospital in Beersheba and hit Haifa. Over 240 Iranians and 20 Israelis are dead, and Trump's got 2 weeks to decide if America jumps in. He's talking tough, demanding Iran's unconditional surrender, but also saying he's not itching for a fight. Classic Trump, keeping everyone guessing. From the right, this looks like a no-brainer. Iran's a bad actor, threatening global security with its nuclear ambitions. Israel's our ally, and standing with them sends a message to Tehran and its proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, who are mouthing off about targeting U.S. troops. X is buzzing with posts supporting a strong U.S. response, with some saying it's time to shut down Iran's nuke program for good. The New York Times reported over 40,000 U.S. troops are in the Middle East, so any move puts our guys at risk. A Washington Post poll says 45% of Americans oppose airstrikes in Iran, with only 25% in favor. The anti-war crowd's worried about another Middle East quagmire, and they're not wrong to be cautious. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan. Reuters even reported Trump's own MAGA base is split, with Tucker Carlson slamming the idea of a strike while Ted Cruz pushes for it. That's a rare rift in the Trump world. Here's where I land. Iran's been poking the bear for years, and letting them go nuclear is not an option. But we don't need another endless war either. Trump's got to thread the needle, back Israel, deter Iran, and keep our troops safe. Diplomacy's got 2 weeks, so let's hope cooler heads can prevail. If not, things could get real messy real fast. All right, back to the home front. Los Angeles was ground zero for some intense protest action this week. On June 13th, Marines and California National Guard troops were deployed to guard the Wilshire Federal Building after anti-Trump protests kicked off. By June 14th, a curfew was in place, and police in riot gear were clashing with demonstrators in downtown Los Angeles. The No Kings protests were in full swing, with marchers in Little Tokyo staying mostly peaceful but pushing back hard against Trump's deportation plans. For conservatives, this is about law and order. The administration's cracking down on illegal immigration and deploying troops to keep things under control makes sense when protests start disrupting cities. Social media posts from the right praise the Marines' presence, saying it's about protecting federal property and stopping chaos before it spreads. Nobody wants a repeat of the 2020s riots. And a strong show of force sends a clear message: play nice or face the consequences. The other side sees this as overreach. ABC News reported on the protests like it was a civil rights showdown, with marchers claiming the military presence is meant to intimidate. Look, I get the optics aren't great. Marines with tactical vehicles don't exactly scream, "Kumbaya." But when you've got crowds ignoring dispersal orders, Something's got to give. The reality is, most Americans just want to go about their day without protests or troops in the streets. This one's a microcosm of the bigger fight. Trump's pushing hard on immigration, and the left's pushing back harder. Both sides are entrenched, but the right's betting on order prevailing. My take? Keep the streets safe, enforce the law, and let's move on. LA's got enough problems without turning into a battleground. All right, let's talk money. Trump's tariff plans are making waves, with deadlines looming for Canada and the EU. Yahoo Finance reported on June 20th that the Liberation Day tariffs could hit on July 9th if deals aren't reached. The Federal Reserve's even saying these tariffs are pushing up inflation estimates for 2025. Trump's playing hardball, using tariffs to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and level the trade playing field. From the right, this is a win. For too long, other countries have taken advantage of America's open markets while protecting their own. Tariffs are a way to fight back, create jobs, and make sure we're not getting ripped off. Social media is full of posts cheering Trump for standing up to globalists, with hashtags like #AmericaFirst trending. The core PCE inflation report dropping June 27th will be a big tell on how this is hitting the economy. The left's not having it. They're calling tariffs attacks on consumers, saying prices will skyrocket for everyday goods. The media is leaning into this, with outlooks like Yahoo Finance warning about inflation spikes. Sure, there's a cost, but the right argues it's a short-term hit for long-term gains. More factories, more jobs, stronger America. The numbers back it up. Manufacturing jobs grew under Trump's first term when tariffs were in play. This one's a chess game. Trump's betting on economic nationalism, while critics say it's a risky move that could backfire. I'm with the America First crowd. Let's build our own stuff and stop relying on foreign handouts. But we'll see how the markets react next week. Stay tuned, folks. This one's a tragedy with some big question marks. An Air India Boeing 787-8 crashed in Ahmedabad last week, and on June 19th, the Ministry of Civil Aviation said they're still deciding where to decode the black box data. The crash has sparked debates about aviation safety and international cooperation. For conservatives, this is a reminder of why we need to prioritize our own infrastructure and safety standards. The details are still murky, but the crash has already been politicized. Some on the right are pointing to it as a reason to tighten regulations on foreign carriers operating in the U.S. Social media posts are calling for stricter oversight, with users saying we can't trust other countries' maintenance standards. The victims have been identified, and it's a heartbreaking loss that's fueling the push for answers. On the flip side, there's caution about jumping to conclusions. The Hindu reported that the investigation's focusing on technical and security factors, but some outlets are already hinting at a possible foul play without evidence. That's really irresponsible. We need facts, not speculation. The left's urging calm, saying global aviation standards are rigorous. But with lives lost, people want accountability, not excuses. My take? Let's get the black box decoded. Figure out what went wrong and make sure it doesn't happen again. Safety first always. This story is a reminder that we can take anything for granted, especially when it comes to air travel. My prayers go out for the families affected in this tragedy. All right, let's talk about a huge ruling that dropped this week. On June 18th, the Supreme Court of the United States upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors in a 6-3 decision, saying it doesn't violate the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. The law, known as SB 1, bans puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgery for kids under 18 when used to treat gender dysphoria. This is a big win for conservatives and parents who've been pushing to protect kids from what they see as irreversible medical decisions. After the ruling dropped, social media was blowing up with posts celebrating it as a victory for common sense, with Tennessee's Attorney General calling it a landmark win for evidence-based medicine. From the right, this is about safeguarding children. The majority, led by Chief Justice John Roberts, said the law doesn't discriminate based on sex or transgender status. It just sets limits on certain medical treatments for all minors, regardless of who they are. Roberts pointed to ongoing debates about the safety and long-term effects of these treatments, citing European studies questioning their efficacy. For conservatives, this is the government stepping in to protect kids from experimental procedures until they're old enough to make informed choices. Social media users were fired up, with some saying it's time for more states to follow Tennessee's lead. On the other side, they're calling this a gut punch. Justice Sonia Sotomayor's dissent was fiery, saying the ruling abandons transgender children and could lead to untold harm. She argued that the ban discriminates based on sex and ignores medical evidence supporting gender-affirming care, like studies showing puberty blockers can reduce suicide in trans youth. The Human Rights Campaign and ACLU slammed the decision, with protests popping off outside the Supreme Court. Of course they did. The left-leaning media, like the New York Times, framed it as a setback for transgender rights, especially with Trump's administration pushing hard against what he calls gender ideology. Here's my take. Kids are too young to make life-altering decisions like this, and parents need guidance, not pressure from activists. The science isn't settled. Europe's backing off these treatments for a reason, but I feel for families caught in the middle. It's a tough spot. With 25 states having similar bans, this ruling is going to shape the fight nationwide. Expect more legal battles and heated debates, but for now, the right's chalking this up as a win for protecting the next generation. This is also a heavy story. The New York Times reported an assassination in Minnesota this week that sent shockwaves through the country. Details are scarce, but it's tied to the political unrest surrounding Trump's policies. The right's calling it a tragic consequence of the left's heated rhetoric, with ex-posts pointing to No Kings protest as stirring up violence. We don't have the full story yet, but the timing, right after the military parade and protests, has everyone on edge. Conservatives are doubling down on calls for law and order, saying this is what happens when you let division fester. The media is being cagey, with some outlets like The Times focusing on the Middle East to deflect. But this is a domestic wake-up call. The left's response is more subdued, urging unity and caution against politicizing a tragedy. But that feels hollow when protests are turning violent. Both sides need to cool it. Words have consequences, and so do actions. The investigation's ongoing, and we need answers fast to keep this from escalating further. My heart goes out to the victims' families. This is the type of thing that makes you step back and pray for the country. We're better than this, folks, so let's act like it. Wrapping it up, we've got Trump's decision to issue sweeping clemency to members of extremist groups and rioters from past incidents, reported by the New York Times on June 14th. For his base, this is about justice, freeing people they see as political prisoners who got caught up in heated moments. Social media is buzzing with MAGA support, saying Trump's righting wrongs from an overzealous justice system. The move's tied to his broader agenda of challenging the establishment. By granting clemency, he signals that he's not afraid to take on the system and protect his supporters. It's a power move, plain and simple, and it's got his base fired up. The right sees this as a stand against what they called a weaponized DOJ. The left's livid, calling it a dangerous precedent that emboldens extremists. The Washington Post and others are framing this as a threat to democracy, pointing to the protests of proof of rising tensions. Look, I get why it's controversial. Rioting is not okay, but neither is selective prosecution. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. This one's going to keep the pot stirred. Trump's playing to his base, but it's alienating everyone else. My take? Let's focus on equal justice under the law, not settling scores. We've got enough division as it is, so let's just look forward as a nation and get back to where we need to be. And that's a wrap, folks. The top 10 news stories from June 13th to June 20th, 2025, with Just a Dude in the News. It's a wild world out there. Parades, protests, tariffs, and big court rulings. But through it all, let's keep it real. America's worth fighting for, and it starts with standing up for what's right. Hit me up on social media with your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay free, stay strong, and I'll catch you on the next episode. I'm Nathan with Just a Dude Podcast.